I think that it is a couple of minutes past. We will get started with the introductions while we wait for others to join us. So Angus, because you're the man with the slides, I'll need you to do that. But firstly, obviously, we'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So we acknowledge and pay our respect to the many First Nations of Australia who continue to be the sovereign custodians of their countries and the sovereignty of the Maori in New Zealand. We acknowledge the ongoing traditional custodians of the land on which we live, work, and learn, and pay our respect to elders who have passed on the legacy of knowledge and culture to the future generations. May this sharing of knowledge through Maori and Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander ways of knowing, being, and doing guide you through wisdom and courage as it enhances our collective futures. So thank you all so much for joining us for this session. We really do appreciate you taking the time out of your day at what I know is a particularly busy time of year. There's a lot that is trying to be wrapped up or planned in preparation for next year. So we do really appreciate you taking some time out today to join us. So I am Dr. Joanne Bennett. I'm the chair of the Early Career Network. And as you know, being members of the ACRS who got access to this to be able to sign up, the Early Career Network is designed to bring people together who work in road safety across all domains and who are early in their careers. One of the hallmark features of the ECN or hallmark programs of the ECN is running the mentorship program. And we also ran the pre-conference event, or well, it's now technically first day of the conference event at the ARSC in Perth. One of the new initiatives that we're trying to do this year, though, and this is only the second of these forums, so Siobhan, you haven't missed much. You're coming in right early. We are looking to do these capacity building workshops. The intention of these workshops is to help support you as early career professionals with understanding a bit of the lay of the land of road safety and also starting to build your own skills, capacity, networks through the workshops that we do. One of the things that we find is that often we have people who are quite senior come and talk to us. And it can be quite hard to relate to somebody who's, 30, 40 years into a career, as opposed to somebody who is relatively new, who is like you in a similar place, maybe just a year or two ahead. So what we're trying to do with these sessions is not, sometimes we'll have some of the big people come and talk to us when we feel that that's helpful and useful. But today we're doing it a little bit differently. We're having us talk to you and sort of take you through where we are at a little bit in our careers in an attempt to sort of support you in how you can build your own networks. So as I mentioned, I'm Dr. Joanne Bennett. I'm the chair of the ECN committee, but I am a senior lecturer in the School of Psychology at the Australian Catholic University. So I finished my PhD in 2018, and my PhD was focused on dementia and driving. I then went into a teaching only role at a university at ACU and was not actually doing very much in the way of research. I was trying to do little bits here and there, but when I moved from Macquarie University, where I had lots of big fancy driving simulators, and I went to ACU where there was nothing, I had to build from the ground up. In terms of what my research career would be. And so part of what I'm going to do today is sort of share some of that journey with you, some of my experiences in building a network when you really are starting from the ground up. And I mean, with nobody around me to be able, and none of the resources that I would have, benefited from. And so I'm hoping that being able to share a little bit of my story as we go through the session today is able to help spark some thoughts and some ways that you might be able to go about building your own networks as you sort of take your journey and in road safety. But I'll also introduce Angus. So Angus, over to you.
Sure. My name's Angus McCarroll, so I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Melbourne. There's a level of self-interest in not just organising, but participating in these workshops myself. As Joe's describing, I'm very much on the earlier stage of my career. So I was awarded my PhD in 2022 from the University of Newcastle, and very quickly turned around and walked away from academia. So I went and worked in an industry research role for a couple of years. And as much as I found that incredibly valuable, I found myself back at Melbourne as recently as August this year. And as Joe is describing, the biggest challenge that I'm facing at the moment, coming from an industry position where funding is provided, by a company as long as those research objectives align with the organization's priorities. I'm now in the position that most academics find themselves, and most researchers find themselves, where funding sources will be the things that give me a continuing position, but also enables me to do the sort of research that, I think is needed and that I'm interested in. So hopefully that has some value as well, especially as an early career researcher, to be able to share some of those experiences.
Now, obviously, Angus and I are coming from a research perspective, but we think a lot of what we're going to talk about is beyond research because we know that road safety is much more complex than that and has a number of many different actors who have roles to play in road safety. So you may not be from a research background. Please don't sign out now because you think that this is not relevant to you. We think that the network building in road safety is one of the fundamental things that we need to do because of how big and the system is and how change doesn't happen from just doing research. Change happens through collaboration across the different systems and really being able to connect in across those different domains, which is really important to be able to enact sort of the meaningful change that we're all hoping to through a career in road safety. So when you try to map the road safety system and the actors involved in the road safety system, it is incredibly challenging. We are talking about academics, we're talking about industry, we are talking about levels of government, and depending on which area you're at, there are different levels of funding that you need to be able to achieve even the most basic of projects that you're trying to do. It is incredibly large and incredibly complex. And so when thinking about how do you understand the network of people who you need to talk to, who you need to connect with, there's no one size fits all. It really depends on sort of your background, where you're coming from, and what you're hoping to achieve with who you need to connect with, when, where, and why. So rather than giving you a really kind of exhaustive, this is absolutely everybody in play in the system. One, that's impossible for us to map. There are too many of them. And two, most of them end up sort of not being really relevant. And so what we're going to work through today is a bit more about how you can map the things that are relevant for you with what it is you are trying to achieve in the work you are trying to do. And so we're going to give some examples under a couple of different headings, as you've got on the screen with you at the moment, as academic partners. But we're going to take you through some academics, some government, some industry partners, as well as talking a little bit about some funding. And then Angus and I are going to take you through an example of each of our networks, who we start looking at, how we do them, why. And then we're going to have a bit of a go sort of as a group, doing some of your own thinking and planning. So you can start creating your own list of who might be your network that you need to work with as you're doing your work in road safety, and thinking about it beyond just academic or just government or just industry, depending on which lens that you're coming from. So starting with sort of a bit of an overview of academic partners, road safety research is a big space, but it's also a really niche space. So when I tell people that I've got a PhD in psychology and they go, oh, cool, they immediately think mental health. And then I tell them road safety and they're like, what? That is wild. They're like, that's super random and really specific. But it is an area that we do have a lot of very strong research in Australia, and we have a lot of research centres, big research centres. A number of them you'd probably be familiar with, names like MUARC, TARS, MACE, CARS-Q, CASA. These are really big names. If you Google any of them, they will immediately come up. I just want to flag, I have specifically put CARS-Q down. It has just gone through a rebrand, but if you Google it, only CARS-Q comes up for now. So just wanted to say that I am aware that the name is changing, but if you're Googling things now, CARS-Q is what you want to be doing and want to be looking at. So that's very specifically there for that reason. So there are these really large research centres, and in those research centres, they sort of tackle different things. So, for example, the Transurban Road Safety Centre that does a lot of work with the George Institute has a lot of focus on injuries and sort of and crashes and injuries. Where when we take a look at CASA, they do a lot of engineering or type research. So they're at a lot of project evaluation stuff too. So they can come from different perspectives. And so it's useful to understand each of those research centres and who might be some of the people that align with your areas in those research centres, because not all of them will be necessarily the best fit for what it is that you're trying to achieve. One of the things I do want to flag, though, is that we often get caught up so much in thinking about the research centres that we actually forget to think about the individual researchers who are at other places that aren't necessarily associated with a research centre. So I can't tell you the number of times I've been told, because I'm at the Australian Catholic University, oh, I didn't know ACU did road safety research. And I'm like, Joe Bennett does road safety research, and I'm at ACU. And so people often just think about these centres and they forget that there's actually a huge number of people doing work in a lot of other spaces. So Angus is at the University of Melbourne, for example. They don't have a big fancy research centre, but there is a really good dedicated team there doing some really great road safety stuff. Similarly, at the University of Newcastle. And so it's important to not just isolate and think about these research centres and actually start thinking about who might be the individual researchers at other places that you might want to reach out to, because they could be doing some really great stuff that aligns with what it is that you're doing. And if you only think of the big ones, you can actually miss some really good opportunities for collaboration and connection, often ones that can come in without some of the other strings that can be attached with some of the bigger research centres, in terms of, if you go for a funding collaboration project, it might be able to be more evenly split than the majority needing to go to one of the centres, for example. So I just want to sort of flag that, because I think that's often missed. We think of the centres and we forget the individuals that can be in a variety of other places. In terms of industry partners, road safety industry is super diverse. We are talking everything from vehicle manufacturers to insurance companies to technological companies like CNI Machines that Angus used to work for, engineering companies, training programs and providers, as well as a lot of grassroots community organisations. There are a lot of organisations that are doing really great work because they've got a connection to road safety. They've got a personal story or a personal mission, and they're doing a lot of great work in their local area. And so it's important to not just think of the really big ones. We often think of, the insurance companies, for example, and NRMA, RACQ, RACV, those sorts of ones, because they tend to put money behind it. But often what can be really beneficial when you're building your network is thinking about some of those community organisations that could be really good end user partners for the work that you're doing, and be able to provide really good insights into the problems that their communities are facing and challenges that they're experiencing, and areas that we really need as a priority for research, for action, for government policy, and so on. So I just wanted to kind of flag that, there are the really big ones, the ones that immediately come to mind when you think of industry, but I want to reinforce the smaller ones, the training partners, the grassroots community organisations, because they're the ones that can do the implementation often, and that's ultimately what we're trying to achieve with any of the work that we do, is being able to have it implemented and actioned in a way that facilitates a safer environment for our community. So then, in terms of government partners, so Australia has one of the more complex governmental structures when it comes to road safety, because all levels of government, local, state and federal, are involved. So there are 567 local government areas in Australia, and they manage 80% of the road network. So they are a really important partner to consider in the work that you're doing, especially from an implementation sort of perspective or a partnership perspective, because again, they're the ones who have a lot of the data on the problems that are being faced, and they're the ones that can work with you to implement, say, a traffic calming project or a community education project. They're really good connections to have. So thinking through in the areas that you live, you work, you study, who are the local government road safety people in that space, and they're good people to connect with. They're often also ones that they run a lot of forums. So they run community forums that you can go to and attend and understand what are the problems being faced in that community that you can then use as your evidence to apply for project funding or as the proposal that you put forward for action to be taken. So really strongly urge you to connect with the relevant local government area in that you're in, because it gives a really good connection opportunity for both understanding as well as for then that feedback for implementation as well. Now, when we talk about licensing and road policing, if that's sort of the areas that you're in, they're managed by the individual states and territories. So to further complicate things, the licensing system is not the same in every single state and territory. The requirements for learners, provisional, and even for older drivers, if we think about fitness to drive at the other end of the lifespan, they vary from state to state. And so it can be very challenging to sort of understand the complexity of that, and what might work in one state doesn't necessarily work in the other. So having a good understanding of what the licensing rules are, training rules are in your individual state and territory is important, especially for the way that you might go about pitching projects and ideas and partnerships in terms of funding. Similarly, policing is different in every state and territory because the road rules actually differ slightly in every state and territory, and the way that they are policed and managed also varies from every state and territory. So having a good understanding of sort of, if you're trying to enact a road safety project in Victoria, what is the lay of the land related to licensing and policing in Victoria, and then who are the people that you need to talk to, and making sure you're matching up with the right partner for the right state that you're going to do the project with, because matching up for something in New South Wales, if you're in Victoria for a project you want to enact in Victoria, isn't going to be the right partnership for you. So thinking that through. In terms of the federal government's role, they manage the national highways, and they're largely there to sort of provide kind of like regulatory support, but they also do provide some funding support. So they do have a National Road Safety Action Grants scheme that is an ad hoc scheme. It happens at different times of there's no sort of set cycle to it, but they do provide sort of a large kind of oversight, especially in terms of the National Road Safety Strategy, and then funding to try and support that National Road Safety Strategy. So understanding in particular kind of that strategy, if you haven't taken a look at it, the National Road Safety Strategy, I would strongly recommend you do that, because it identifies priority areas and how state and local governments can feed into that, and then how the federal government might act to support that. And so it seems like a lot in terms of government, because it's a lot. I won't sort of lie about that, but getting a bit of a lay of the land of those three different levels and how they might be relevant to you is really helpful, especially if you're then thinking about projects that you're looking to do and how you're going to pitch them. Because if you can understand sort of the level that you're trying to work with, you can better align the pitch that you're trying to make, and therefore then have greater success. There are also national level organisations such as Austroads that can that sort of pull a lot of those state and territories together. Now, in terms of funding partners, and we are going to sort of run through some examples, there's a huge variety in funding opportunities that are available for you. So some of them can be really quite small. So like the NRMA ACT Road Safety Trust, their projects up to $50,000. You do not have to be an academic to go for those projects. A lot of community organisations go for that funding. Their expectations is not necessarily about research per se. It's often about sort of like implementation and how we sort of maybe do some road safety education or messaging or so on. So it's not always research funding that some of these trusts are set up for. Others, though, can be really quite large and very focused on research. For example, the Australian Automobile Association, they're just going through a little bit of a rework of the way they do their funding, though. So just want to flag that as a watch this space for next year, because they're going to release information in the new year about how their new funding scheme is going to operate. And there could be some really good opportunities for people through that. One of the things to flag, though, is you need to really know how to pitch the right project for the right funding area. So sometimes it's not about the idea, it's about the way you pitch that idea. So for example, the two, large national funding schemes, the NHMRC, National Health and Medical Research Council, and the ARC, the Australian Research Council, have two entirely different ways you need to pitch. So road safety is beautiful in the sense that it can actually go in either direction, but you've got to make sure you pitch it in the right way. So for example, for NHMRC, it's focused on health-based outcomes. So we're talking about with road safety, things like injury prevention, post-crash care, things related to sort of health-based outcomes, or getting the community more active through active transportation, will result in sort of net health benefits for people. So it's sort of pitching kind of that medical health space, where for the ARC, do not mention anything clinical whatsoever. They don't want it, they're not interested in it. So you're doing more kind of the basic science, the pitching related to projects that are looking at theories or attention, or that kind of more basic kind of science side of things. So it's important when you think about funding partners that you really think through what is the goal of that funding? What are they trying to achieve? And when you kind of think that, and you can almost then backwards work kind of the idea and the area, that's really important. Don't go, this is my idea and I'm going to cram it into every funding scheme, because you're going to end up doing a lot of work for not a lot of success. So that kind of gives sort of a very high level overview of some of the networks that we're talking about. As I mentioned, though, this is not a one size fits all. So Angus and I are going to take you through our two examples now, and sort of start going through how they differ and getting you to start thinking about how it might be relevant for you. So Angus, I think you're up first.
Yeah, I just want to comment on those previous slides as well. Maybe just to spruik the ACRS a little bit. I think it's one thing to identify different government and industry collaborators and academic collaborators, but one thing I found moving to another state as part of coming to the University of Melbourne is that the immediate contacts you have and the programs that are available to you are obviously different, coming from the ACT before that and New South Wales prior to that. So attending things like the Victorian chapter of the ACRS held a conference recap event this week, which was a really great opportunity to go and actually meet the people who, for example, I met one person who had reviewed and awarded the grant that funds my current position. So being able to actually connect with the people who are making the decisions and being able to talk through the criteria that determine whether or not you're successful is a pretty rare opportunity. So take it while you can. Everyone here is a member of the ACRS, whether it's a student or a full member, so take those advantages where you can. This activity, as Joe said, we've put this together to map out our own networks, and mine will be quite minor. As I said, I'm very early in my career in that sense, but I think that's a good indication that you don't have to have everything together at this stage. But I'll step you through my academic industry and underfunding partners that I've worked with in the past and I'm working with currently. But I'd encourage anyone, as you're going through, we'll have some time once both of us have worked through our examples to put some ideas down for your own, and then hopefully have a bit of a discussion as a group between everyone else's different relationships. But if you want to write...
I was just going to say, I guess I've just sent through the document in the chat that hopefully you can all see and access. And this is sort of what we're using for working through this. So you can sort of download that, open it, and then be able to start putting some ideas, especially if there's some that Angus says or I say that go, oh, that's a good one. Jot it down.
Yeah, great, perfect. So for me, for my academic partnerships, I completed my PhD at the University of Newcastle, and part of the reason that I've managed to maintain connections through that is during my postgraduate research, I was able to work on a few industry projects at the same time, and they've turned into collaborations that have continued since finishing that university and continuing here. Um, where you study does become a pretty significant source of continued collaboration, not necessarily with the institution, but with the individuals that you meet. So the University of Newcastle's Cognition Lab has a wonderful group of people that do a lot of applied cognitive modeling and have strong relationships with a variety of different industries. The thing that I've taken from that relationship is that the fundamental modeling principles that they research and their focus interest areas can be applied to as many different domains as you can think of. So in my case, that's been applied in a road safety and driving cognition space. But they have worked in everything from aviation to machine learning for frog detection to community science projects, and finding groups like that, it has been really valuable. Also at the University of Melbourne. So I'm based here now, and I think Joe hinted at this before about the value of seeking out individuals and not just focusing on the big research centres. One of the first things that I did when I started down here was to look up who was working in the road safety space that also happened to be nearby. And I found at least 3 different groups that were informal collections of researchers that were all working in the same space but weren't talking to each other. So I probably spent a couple of months cold contacting level E's who for coffees, and that's gone quite well in terms of drawing those connections. But they are groups who work in parallel and are competing for the same funding, but they're not necessarily collaborating on the tenders that they're putting together. So I'd encourage anyone to actually look first within your own institution, because being at the same location really does go a long way towards building that collaboration. In terms of industry partnerships, the only one I have listed there at the moment is, so I used to work for Seeing Machines, and I actually think one of my friend and colleagues is on the call as well, so who used to work at Seeing Machines, but I won't call her out just yet. They have previously and still are involved in funding external research collaborations, as long as those collaborations align with company priorities. I think that's a big comment to make around industry collaborations. Even if you get to the more formal schemes, things like ARC's research, industry fellowship positions, and similar schemes that encourage collaboration. Obviously, the ARC linkage grants make up an enormous proportion of the funding that's provided by the ARC. So finding applications, especially within road safety, where there is a clear commercial outcome, does open several doors in terms of funding sources. There is always a challenge between aligning your research interest from your question with the interests of the private body. Sometimes that can be quite smooth, and sometimes that can be a friction-filled relationship. So navigating that is sometimes tricky, but often very rewarding. The last space for me, so there are 2 programs that have been substantial in my pathway up until now. So I'll actually talk about the second one first. The AAA Road Safety Research Programs, joking to that before, is currently undergoing a reshaping, but they've previously funded large-scale multi-year projects in line with the National Road Safety Research priority areas. So there are a number of priority areas detailed in the scheme that are identified as target research domains for maximum impact. The AAA Road Safety Program was funding, and is still funding, I should say, an existing project that we've been running for about 3.5 years on the assessment of in-vehicle distractibility, the distractibility, I should say, of in-vehicle infotainment systems. And that enables us to do full on-track testing with multiple participants, highly sophisticated setups, and international collaborations. I probably shouldn't speak too much about what the program's going to look like just yet, because we will see more information next year. But there are other industry bodies in that same vein that, peak bodies, I should say, in that same vein, that do take private member money and funnel that towards a common good, put it that way. So the AAA is an interesting one. They do represent the motoring clubs around Australia, and so there is a need for that funding to align with public benefits that do also benefit those participants and those clubs. But I've seen that to be an incredibly fruitful collaboration that's continued on for a number of years. The other one is the Road Safety Action Grants Program, which funds my current position. So we're able to do reasonably basic science that does then tie in with an outcome. So we have an obligation to generate, show material real world impact, not just in Victoria, but nationally. That scheme, as Joe said, is pretty ad hoc, but if you can get involved, I think they're covering areas that can show um, greatest return for the dollar. So if you can demonstrate that your basic research can actually result in material improvement in road safety, then they're pretty open and easy to work with. Might jump on to the next one. I think I'll hand it over to you, Joe.
Okay, I am a little bit further along in my career than Angus, but not professor level yet. That'll come. No, so I've got a number of different collaborators, and they all serve different purposes for me in terms of the collaboration that we do. So some of them are uh, particular universities, some of them are road safety people, and some of them aren't. So one of the things that I think is really important when you think about the projects is you think about what are the skills that you need for this particular project, not just who the people are and are they in road safety. Sometimes we think a little bit too insular, and we don't often think a little bit broader than that. So one of my key collaborations in terms of academic partners is actually with RMIT, who had never done anything in the road safety space before. And I met with a team of digital designers because I do a lot of work related to virtual reality and also related to the development of training programs. Um, and I was like, oh, I'm not very good at sort of the digital side of things. How do I make this come to life? And so we actually work with a dedicated team of digital design experts from RMIT who are the best at what they do in digital design, but know absolutely nothing about road safety until they met me. And so that has been a really fruitful collaboration because it has allowed me to turn what my idea is into something relatable. And I think that that's an important thing when you think about academic partners. We've talked a lot about, road safety partners, but think about what are the skill sets that I need to be able to do this. So you can see that some of them have been related to, for example, with the University of the Sunshine Coast, the team that I've worked with there aren't actually aren't a road safety team. They are a human factors team that can do some road safety work, but actually they specialize in what's called systems mapping. And so they are urban planners and town designers and human factors researchers, but they can apply their skills to road safety, but they don't actually exclusively work in road safety or wouldn't call themselves a road safety experts. And so when thinking about the projects, I like to do a lot of co-design. As you can see, it's co-design all across the board there in terms of taking my idea and taking their different skills and sort of and bringing those two things together. I also do have some road safety partnerships, obviously, in collaboration. I do some work with MUARC. We also have done some work with CASA, but again, with CASA, it was taking my psychology and their engineering and bringing those two things together to design a project related to motorcycles. I've thrown you in there, Angus, because I'm going to make sure that you commit to collaborating with me. But again, you can see that some of it's related to big research centres and others are related to universities that actually aren't associated with those research centres. And it's also thinking about when you're doing your network map, it's putting down the ones that you've already got, but also putting down the ones that you want. So I've put down the bottom at the George Institute. I am here today at the George Institute to have an initial conversation related to the work that they do for injury prevention and the work that I do and where there could maybe be an overlap. So as you work your way through the document, please don't just go, these are the people I have. Put down the people you want. And starting to think through, given where you are and what you want to achieve, what could be some potential collaborations, and then who are the people that maybe you should start to reach out to in that space, and then you go, okay, I've written the George Institute down, and so I went and met Professor Julie Brown when I was at the conference and set this thing up from that. And so if you've got a list of organizations or potential partners that you think could work or potential names, then it helps guide you when you have networking opportunities to take advantage of those or to do as Angus said, just cold email. You will be surprised at the number of people who respond to emails that are genuinely looking for ways to collaborate. Most people want to work together. And so don't be afraid to go, hey, you don't know me, but this is a little bit about me, and I would like to do a little bit of work in this space. Would you have time for us to have a coffee or an online meeting or something like that to see if there are areas or the wanky term is synergies for how we could maybe work together. So just thinking about that as you start putting ideas down for your own map. It's not just who you know, it's who you want to be with too. In terms of industry partners, one of the things Angus covered, some of the challenges of needing to work with industry. I'm going to take the perspective related to the grassroots organisations. So my partnerships have predominantly been local partnerships. So I, again, am doing a project related to young Indigenous drivers and developing training programs to support young Indigenous drivers. So rather than going, this is the program I'm going to do, we actually went to an Indigenous community, the Wanneroo Nation, and asked them if they would be interested in sort of doing some stuff in this space. And we're completely co-designing a program for young Indigenous drivers, and we're pulling in local driving training experts who are Indigenous in terms of to develop and deliver that program. What are the gaps that they need, and how can our project fill that? And so those kind of partnerships are good in terms of collaboration, but they're also good in terms of implementation and taking it from just who are the people I can do the research with or the project with to who are the people who can actually turn this into a reality. So we're creating, this training program, virtual reality training program for young Indigenous drivers. That's no good if nobody actually then starts doing it with young Indigenous drivers. And so building those local connections takes a bit of time, but is really worthwhile and valuable because that's how you translate something from idea to impact. So just like I said, just flagging that. Similarly, involvement of government is really important for translation of research into implementation. So I've got a project coming about rural road safety in terms of post-crash care. And so we're looking to bring together people who are in local rural communities and to deliver the post-crash care. So working with local governments who have those connections and pulling them together and pulling the rural community together for forums is actually really important for translating our ideas about how we can, better implement post-crash care into practice. So that's at that really local level. And then in terms of the state level, we also work with the New South Wales government leveraging one of their training programs for Indigenous drivers and adding our training on top of what it is that they're doing as a suite almost. So those are really like using government for implementation, as I said, is important. In terms of funding, Angus has already mentioned the Australian Automobile Association. I've already previously mentioned the Australian ECT Road Safety Trust. I also just want to flag a few others in terms of like Austroads. So Austroads does really specific calls for research tenders. So they've actually got an idea for a project in mind, and then they're looking for people who would be able to work on that and collaborate on that project. So they are through that actually identify through the states and territories areas of need. And so paying attention to what the Austroads tenders are, and you can sign up for an email and it will send an email automatically to you when they're available is important because sometimes they overlap exactly with the areas in which you work. So I've done a lot of stuff related to hazard perception, and they had a tender related to hazard perception testing. I also have done a lot of stuff related to fitness to drive for older adults, and they had a tender related to updating the guidelines for fitness to drive. So you will find, as opposed to sort of having to have the idea yourself, you might find that some of these calls actually really align with the work that you're doing, and you may actually end up being the best person to do that work. So having them come in is really useful. It also gives you a good sense for nothing else other than what are the priority areas for the states and territories? What are the things that they're looking at and working on, and needing more on? Because then that can help shape your other projects that you might be looking to do. So it is really valuable, even just as an information gathering exercise, as much as it is for securing your own funding. I mentioned sort of the NHMRC and ARC projects. I do also just want to flag the MRFF, which is a subset of the NHMRC, where the MRFF has sort of priority areas, some priority areas that are really relevant to road safety. These include rural and regional Australia, and also Indigenous health. So taking a look at the priority areas is really helpful, because there's actually quite a lot that road safety relates to. If we think about the fact that the majority of road fatalities occur in regional and rural areas, all of a sudden that becomes a priority area that road safety relates to for the MRFF projects. And they have a lot of different schemes throughout the year, where the normal sort of NHMRC ideas grants and the ARC discovery grants, they're competing. You're competing every idea up against one another. The MRFF will actually make kind of specific calls for projects related specifically to Indigenous health or specifically to rural, and they pop up all the time throughout the year. And because they're a little bit more specific, they can in some ways be a little bit easier for you to really have a good go at. And they also have ones that are deliberately designed, like the ARC and the NHMRC, for people in early career work. And a lot of the MRFF is about implementation. So you don't have to be an academic to go for it. You could be sort of doing some other kind of government or community or industry work and be really eligible for those MRFFs. So just to kind of flag, to think a little bit differently and a bit broadly, because there is a lot of opportunities that are available, but the main thing is getting the right pitch for the right scheme. So understanding what they are trying to achieve, what their priority areas are, because road safety can be twisted for almost all of them. So I'm going to stop there in terms of mine. I'm hoping, as we sort of went through, that gave you some ideas and some thoughts in that you might want to sort of think through. But I thought we would open it up to the floor now, thinking about sort of academic partners, and who are some of the academic partners you're thinking of and why? Or if you're not sure, maybe you could give us a spiel about you and we could give you some ideas.
I'm happy to go. Get rid of that awkward silence. So I am already at CASA. And I'm in injury research and understanding the patterns of injury. And so kind of identified a couple of groups. So MUARC, I'd like to reach out to them, see what they're doing in that space, as well as the sustainable mobility and safety research from where they're from? I can't remember. But run by Ben Beck. I was speaking to his PhD student, and we wanted to collaborate on a couple of things there, but also things like the Jamison Institute would be interesting to collaborate with and reach out to. Again, I've only been in this role for a year, so I haven't really established anything yet, but that's kind of where I'm thinking.
That's great. I would add it to that if you're looking at injury prevention type stuff, the George Institute.
I have added that, yes.
Ellie, I'm looking at you, Ellie,
Mm.
as a potential connection.
Yeah, perfect.
Anybody else in terms of your academic partners? Who are some of the ones that you're thinking? Or are you not sure and you don't know how to find them? Ellie.
I think yes, Joanne. I may give an example, but actually it's not within Australia. I actually collaborate with international university and researchers. So it's like it's works in the way that we published a paper using specific statistical modeling method, and then in the conference that people email and tell us, oh, they are interested in applying that kind of methods in their own data and their own studies. So it's like starting with supply tutoring and guiding their PhD students, and as well as now develop kind of collaboration in the supporting of the technical, professional, analytical skills, whatever. And they give us some related data, and also resources that we can develop. Of course, that kind of work, research projects were based on their own countries, but it's kind of building, it's not because of the cultural differences. I think it takes a little bit time to build up the rapport between two countries' researchers. But I think that's another example of developing an academia area. And sometimes we attend international conferences, so it's always the chances and opportunities there.
No, that's great, Ellie. And it is one of the things to flag that, international collaborations are also wonderful. I must admit, for me personally, I've found I started closer to home, and then sort of working and turning outward. So for me, as Angus said, it was starting with the people at my university and starting to build a team with the people who were around me who had entirely different skills. One of them, most of them are exercise scientists actually, that I was like, hey, you want to do road safety stuff? And they did. But starting kind of, for me, I started inward and then moved outward once I sort of had a bit of a team around me, because it can be challenging to try, and as Ellie said, it's a lot of work and it can take a lot of time to sort of build up these collaborations. So for me, I sort of got my core and then kind of turned and building the connections that way. But you may have established international ones already, and I say go for them.
I will add to that. I do feel like there's an element of, especially in road safety research in Australia, of parochialism to some extent. I've found, at least personally, coming from Melbourne, that cross-state collaborations are almost treated the same as international collaborations. If you're outside Victoria, then you're somewhere else completely, and it's all the same, which made me laugh to begin with. But once you get past that barrier, things do pick up. So.
All right. What about industry collaborations? Any ones that or networks that are coming to mind, or are you not sure how to find them?
I think for me, being in the injury side of things, definitely finding any industry partners I don't know much about the space at all.
Yeah, so it's challenging, right? In terms of going who's who in the zoo. It can be really hard to know where to start. As Angus said, one of the really beautiful benefits of the ACRS is the totally transdisciplinary nature of the people who are a part of the ACRS. It's less than half of them are actually like academics, right? A lot of people do work across sort of industry, government, a lot of kind of those grassroots organizations too. And so it takes a little bit of time to go, who are the people that are in my space that I need to learn and connect with? But if we think about injury, it depends in part whether you're doing kind of car injury, whether you're doing motorcycle injury, because there are different groups depending on sort of where you're at. So say you're sort of doing stuff related to motorcycles, there's like MotorCap, who do a lot of stuff looking at injuries and injury prevention in terms of the protective equipment and stuff, and they would be a potential sort of collaborative partner. If you're looking at sort of vehicles, it's sort of more looking at the ANCAP and those sorts of organizations that do the standard ratings, set the standards, do the ratings, do the assessment. So those kinds of partnerships are some of the ones that you're thinking or starting to look to. And like I said, they're not necessarily looking to them to always be collaborators, but they could be the ones that you look to for getting information from them to better understand the problem that you're trying to tackle, or for doing the implementation of what it is that you're trying to achieve in that translation. So I think that's sort of what you're thinking through. What's the ultimate goal of your project, and who are you trying to translate or that to? And that's often where you'll find the best industry partner direction. So for me, it was about, okay, I want to do stuff with young Indigenous drivers. I need to translate this to an Indigenous community and to the people who actually work with young Indigenous drivers. Who are they? They aren't the big companies. They're the ones on the ground teaching them how to drive, running the programs to help support them. So it's starting to think through, if this is my project, what am I wanting to come from that? And then who might be the right type of partner to fit? And is it just I need information, or collaboration, or implementation? I don't
One
know.
thing absolutely. But one thing I'll add to that as well is that I know we're talking about this largely, as a collaborator or as a funding source into industry for those roles. Another role that I think is overlooked is often as simply as an endorsement. So I know we've done work, and part of our submission to the AAA was around bringing in our collaborations list and describing our team, having training providers endorsing our research proposal to say, yes, we think this would be valuable and help us in the implementation stage, even if that provider wasn't going to be involved in the research itself, was enough to, that sort of thing strengthens an application and does actually carry a lot of weight in some circumstances. So, it doesn't have to be convincing someone to spend dollars on you to be able to get some kind of utility there.
Yeah, and I will sort of second that. There's a lot of the funding organizations that actually do want you to have industry partners as a part of your team, and to do that sort of endorsement. I've got one for an MRFF that we put forward that all they're doing is just saying, we think that this is a good idea, and we're prepared to kind of help you with our connections in our community, but we're not involved with what you're doing, but we're just happy we think this is a good idea. Ellie?
Yes, I think another way of considering the collaboration with internet industries that I have a project that it's not a project, it's a research proposal that we consider the fitness of drive, and then the end user or end clients, consumers of assessing the fitness to drive is actually occupational therapists and GPs. So we're looking at those group of professional medical background groups, peoples, and then see if they have any GP. They have done fitness assessments to drive, and then also the occupational therapists who are doing the assessments and then involving them in the project's proposal development. So I think that's not another way of looking at the industry and collaboration. So the consumers and clients of the research outcome.
No, that's great, Ellie, especially for there's a big move in a lot of the funding organizations and a lot of the sort of government proposals and stuff is that end user engagement and interaction. And so thinking through who they are and sort of getting them on board through the project kind of development. And I mean, that's whether you're developing, a project in your community and government, or whether you're developing a research funding project, having them in and having kind of that consultation and collaboration with them from the beginning is actually so beneficial for then having good outcomes at the end. And a lot of organizations are now sort of pushing for that, because I think there has been a history of poor design where it's a good research design or a good project design, but not actually one that then translates into meaningful use for the people at the other end. And so having them, from the beginning is really beneficial and helpful. Now, I am aware that we are basically at time, and so I know that we haven't gotten to go kind of through the government and the funding part, but I'm hoping that it's sort of sparked at least enough to go, how do I start filling my network out, remembering that no two networks are going to be the same, and you've got to think through what's the area that you work in, what are the goals you are trying to achieve, and that's at the outset of that document is, what do you do and what are the goals that you're working towards? And if you start from that and you start thinking through these are the goals, then you start to build the network map that supports that. Who are the people I'm going to need to get involved? And hopefully this has given a bit of an overview from some people who are very much building their own networks from literally the ground up. Like I said, I started with nobody. Angus mentioned, the people that you worked with at your previous university is super helpful. I finished my PhD and then the two of them retired. So that wasn't very helpful, was it? And so I had to really kind of build from that ground up. So it's doable, it's possible, but starting to kind of think through those levels and who you might want to talk to and how and who you might approach is really helpful. So I'm hoping that has been helpful for each of you. Very happy if at any point in time you go, "Oh, I'm really stuck," and you just need somebody to bounce ideas off. We're here and we're happy to bounce. So please don't hesitate to reach out to the ECN email address, and we could definitely find a time to kind of help sort of do some of that bouncing. We're not going to have all of the answers. We're not the professors of 40 years, but we are people who understand sort of where you're at, and hopefully we can help you build a network. And who knows, maybe we are part of your network and are able to sort of find ways to work together moving forward. So thank you so much, everybody, for your time. Thank you, Angus, so much for your input as well. Really appreciate you all joining us today, and we will hopefully see you again soon.